Hi, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Massimo Stella, leader of the Cognosco Lab at the University of Exeter, and this talk will be about assessing the emotional structure of suicide letters and healthy recollections with cognitive network science. Let's start by having a look at some statistics and definitions. Suicide is the gesture of taking one's own life. In Japan, in October 2020, despite the overwhelming pandemics of COVID-19 that caused 2,000 deaths, the deaths by suicide were actually higher. The WHO estimates that all over the world there is a suicide every 40 seconds, and suicides are the fourth cause of death in teenagers. Now, these statistics are quite concerning. They indicate that suicide is a real challenge, and if we want to tackle it, we need to understand it better. Suicide ideation is the process that leads somebody to taking their own life. Suicide ideation is the creation of a distorted mindset that changes the way that people perceive the gravity of doing suicide, of recurring to suicide. Now, the challenge to save thousands and thousands of lives is to understand better what suicide ideation is and how it happens. Can we use cognitive network science for understanding the distorted structure of suicide ideation? This is the main research question that we adopted in our project, and we followed it by having a look at psycholinguistics. In psycholinguistics, the mental lexicon is a cognitive system that acquires, stores, processes, and produces knowledge in the form of language. Decades of research, very nicely summarized in these two books, indicate that the structure of associations between concepts in the mental lexicon influence deeply how knowledge and language are elaborated and communicated, so that there is a connection between the mind of individuals and the language that they use. We can exploit this connection to reconstruct the associative mindset of suicide ideation, starting from the language produced by people who committed suicide. So we need data, and this data comes in the form of suicide letters. Sometimes suicide is gradual. People who commit suicide have the time and energy to leave behind a fragment of their minds in the form of a letter. This is a suicide note. In our case, we used a dataset of 139 genuine suicide notes released by Schorne and Detlefs, who investigated it for automatic classifications of suicide ideation in texts. In our case, rather than doing classification, we wanted to understand the structure of conceptual associations in these nodes, and to do so, we built two kinds of cognitive networks: a co-occurrence expressing syntactic relationships between concepts, and a subject-verb-object network using natural language processing for understanding actors, actions, and consequences of the narratives expressed in suicide notes. Also, we compared these cognitive structures extracted from suicide notes against random null models, in this case configuration models, that fixed the empirical degree distribution but randomized conceptual associations, and we also used free associations, healthy recalls, coming from individuals involved in a mega study, The Small World of Words by Simon Dedin and colleagues, that actually consisted in people reading cue words and recollecting the first few words that came to their minds relative to these cues, so that these free associations are indicative of memory recollections coming from a healthy population. In our case, we measured different things and different aspects. Unfortunately, I cannot cover all of them, But to give a glimpse of what we did, we measured conceptual prominence of concepts, understanding which concepts were more important, more semantically prominent in suicide notes. We characterized conceptual prominence in terms of closeness centrality, which is a distance-based metric. Now, in cognitive networks, previous studies have shown that semantic distance is indicative of semantic relatedness between concepts. In this way, closer centrality indicates how well connected a certain concept is in terms of semantic similarities with all the other concepts appearing in a certain text. Once we identified these prominent concepts, we also reconstructed their semantic frames. According to semantic frame theory, meaning is cast upon individual words through associations, so that for us, a semantic frame was a network neighborhood of a certain concept. By having a look at the emotions populating this framework, we reconstructed how that concept was perceived. Now, in terms of closeness, we found that love was the most important, most semantically prominent concept across suicide letters. It was more prominent than expected in configuration models, and also in a baseline coming from free associations, but limited to the same set of words present in suicide notes. In free associations, time and money were more central than love. So these results indicate that love is extremely important for suicide notes, for the text of suicide notes. And we wanted to understand how it can be framed in such notes. To do so, we performed emotional profiling. In these visualizations that resemble flowers, this is a quantitative implementation of the Plutchik's wheel, which is a visualization where petals indicate the strength of emotions. In our work, petals indicate Z-scores that express how rich, in terms of words eliciting a certain emotion, the semantic frame of a concept is compared to random expectation in terms of sampling words at random from an emotional dataset. For us, the dataset was the NRC emotion lexicon. Now, in suicide notes, love elicits more emotions than what is found in the free association baseline. In the free association baseline, in a healthy population essentially, love elicits joy, trust, and anticipation into the future, hope. In suicide notes, instead, love is found to elicit a lower level of anticipation, so that love is related to concepts from the past or from the present, and joy and trust are still present, but they coexist with less positive emotions like sadness and surprise, which indicate that love is framed in a different way compared to what healthy populations would do, in a way that is sadder, richer, with more negative jargon. There are also other results that we had a look at. We introduced another definition of structural balance for cognitive networks according to valence, the pleasantness of individual concepts. And we found that suicide notes have a tendency to cluster together positive and negative concepts, reducing the amount of connections in between positive and negative ideas or words. This is indicative of a reduced tendency for the narratives of suicides to mention conflict or tension. Also, through the NLP application of the subject-verb-object analysis, we identified that love was an action strongly related to the concept of the self, targeting mainly loved people, loved ones, and being specified by specific mentions or expressions like I always love you, or like I love you dead, or I love you much, which indicate a close expression of love towards loved ones. This is expected in notes that are supposed to be a final farewell to loved ones. So All in all, we reconstructed the mindset of people who committed suicide as a cognitive network, extracted from their language, from their final notes. Our analysis found that love was more central than expected in these letters. So it wasn't any negative expression, it was no desperation, it was no negative concept, it was love. That was the key idea, the key concept expressed in these letters. This is a powerful result, which also relates to the fact that unfortunately the love framed in suicide letters was not exactly the one recalled by healthy individuals. In this case, we found evidence, quantitative evidence, for a distortion of the concept of love, featuring more sadness and less anticipation into the future. This might be a preliminary evidence for the distortion that appears in people that are strongly affected by suicide ideation, and it confirms also the fact that the language expressed in suicide notes is different from the common language, as it was already hypothesized, conjectured in previous studies. All in all, our understanding how concepts are framed and perceived emotionally can open new features, can identify new features of these texts that can then power the next generation of algorithms detecting early signals of suicide ideation and saving lives. I would like to thank you for your attention and mention all the amazing collaborators that work with me on this project. Most of the results that I talked about here were contained in scientific reports that we published very recently, and we are also working on a follow-up paper that is currently under review. Thank you for your attention. I'm available for any questions. Thanks.